Is the Apple Vision Pro worth $3,500? Absolutely not. You don't need to spend this kind of money if you're just getting started in spatial computing. There are plenty of other options like the Quest 3 that offer up many of the same features for a significantly lower price point. The Apple Vision Pro is heavy, the resolution is not great, and the field of view is significantly smaller than it should be, and yet, this is the most excited I've ever been about a VR headset. As someone who's creating a spatial animation for this new medium, for every new headset like this that gets released, we have to be careful about missing the forest for the trees. If the initial reactions to filmmaking were that the film isn't even in color, the projector's too loud, and it doesn't even have sound, and therefore cinema as a medium is not worth pursuing, with the benefit of hindsight, we understand that that position is ridiculous. Spatial is a new medium that's still being developed for the long term, and all of the issues that I mentioned about the weight, the resolution, the price point, and the field of view are all things that will be fixed as the technology catches up to the medium. Quite frankly, the thing that I'm most excited about the Apple Vision Pro has nothing to do with the hardware itself. It's actually the term spatial. We've been inundated with acronyms like AR, VR, XR, even MR, with little to no difference between these terms. For years, this community has lacked direction, or at least someone leading the community towards educating the public about the medium instead of trying to impress them with the technology. If you know anything about Apple, this is the approach that they were always going to do. They did it with the iPhone, and they're going to do it again with the Vision Pro. The VR community is guilty of trying to make the public run before they can walk with this new medium. And then when there's a lack of interest, they turn to blaming the technology itself rather than their own failure to educate the public on what to expect from this new medium. Personally, I've been showing virtual reality to dozens of my friends and colleagues for the last 6 years, and I had to remind almost every single one of them to look up. Otherwise, they would have just thought it was a fancy Viewmaster. Apple has always led with a why, not a what or a how. Let me explain what I mean by that. The author Simon Sinek wrote a book called Start With Why, but he points out something that I think is really interesting, and it makes all of Apple's decisions about the Vision Pro make complete sense. Other companies, when trying to sell you their phones, will say things like it has an all-day battery, it takes thousands of pictures, or it's waterproof. They focus on the what of the product itself and how it does what it does. Instead, here's how Apple promotes their phones. We like to challenge the status quo, and we think that the beauty of life should be reflected in the things that we use every day. If you feel this way, you're gonna love our phones. Do you see the difference between these two approaches? Apple starts with why they do what they do, because why hits our emotional core.
People don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it.
Using this approach of starting with why, let's analyze what Apple did with the Vision Pro. Apple understands that VR is a medium that will continue to evolve over not just the next few years, but the next few decades. They didn't rush this into market the same way that other companies have, because they understood that a first impression is everything. If Apple's philosophical position is to challenge the status quo, then they had to look at what the status quo was for virtual reality. It was a landscape of confusing acronyms, expensive hardware that required even more expensive PCs to run, and novelty experiences like the metaverse. I've already talked at length about the metaverse and why I think it's a bad thing, so you can check out my other video for my thoughts on that, but let me know if you want an updated video for 2024. Apple understood that people needed to be reintroduced to the concept of augmented and virtual reality, so they focused on branding first. The word spatial is frankly genius because it describes a 3D environment that can be overlaid onto the real world or replace it, and it does it in 2 syllables. They also understood that when people are introduced to something for the first time, they need to have training wheels, a reference point that they are familiar with, rather than put people immediately into a 3D environment like outer space, where they would definitely be overwhelmed. They're starting small by showcasing floating windows in 3D space. Everyone's familiar with the concept of flat 2D screens, and this is what grounds the UI for those that are unfamiliar with the medium. They also waited until the technology could be used without controllers. They did the same thing with the smartphone. They didn't want to have people use a stylus for their phones. But again, I don't think the Vision Pro is worth getting if you're not already invested in the medium. The hardware itself is a first-generation product, and a lot of the issues that a majority of people take issue with are not impossible to solve. A lot of the criticism that I see of the Vision Pro focuses on these shortcomings and comes to the conclusion that Apple missed the mark and that VR is dead. But again, that misses the forest for the trees. It's not about the what or the how, it's about the reasoning behind these features. So let's talk about the future of this medium and why I'm still all in on spatial animation. Like I mentioned in my other videos, I'm currently developing an animation called New Venice with the goal to create a Pixar quality film. I use the term film with hesitation because the medium of spatial isn't really like film at all. It's actually more like theater. Think about it. When you watch a show on Broadway, you are immersing yourself in a new environment, the theater, and you know what you're about to see is not real life, but you've agreed to suspend your disbelief for the next few hours and watch a story that takes place in the same space as you do. The stage is limited to the space directly in front of you, and 9 times out of 10, no one is coming into the audience for you to turn around and look at directly behind you. Because the story happens in the same space that you occupy, you feel a stronger connection to the characters and the story than you would if you were just watching a recording of it at home. There's nothing stopping you from turning around in your chair and facing the other way for the entire show, but your connection to the story and the characters keep you facing forward. This is the philosophy that I'm applying to spatial animation. I want New Venice to feel like the next generation of theater, rather than a gimmicky 3D movie. As I mentioned in my screenplay episode of the New Venice Chronicles, I've written the script in the second person to include you, the viewer, to indicate what you will be looking at and experiencing in this story. I'm treating the environment that the story takes place in as the stage, and the characters and the elements will transition in and out of the stage without any hard cuts, at least in theory. You know how in theater, when the stage transitions from one scene to the other, how the actors will step forward onto the corner of the stage so that the curtain can go down and rearrange for the next set? That's kind of my approach with this story, to use the characters themselves to transition you from one set to the other. The environment can fade in and out like the rising and falling of a curtain, but the characters should be the thing that helps you transition into the next scene. This might also help with motion sickness, because I don't want to have too many sweeping camera moves for the sake of showing off the capabilities of spatial animation. To me, that's the equivalent of a 3D movie that features characters who reach out towards the audience. It feels really cheap. Now, am I the first person to consider how animation feels in VR? Absolutely not. I'm not claiming to invent this theory, although I haven't seen too many people make that connection to theater. What I'm most interested in is telling the story of my characters, and I think in combination with the beautiful world that my team and I are developing, it will be something that looks and feels like nothing you've ever seen before. I'm really excited about the Apple Vision Pro hitting the market, because that means that more people will understand what it is we're trying to do. I guarantee you in 5 years, we're gonna look back on the Apple Vision Pro and marvel at how far spatial computing has come, with higher resolutions, wider field of views, and lightweight, approachable hardware. But I'd also like to add to that conversation the topic of radical new ways of telling stories. Once artists and storytellers get their hands on this technology, we're gonna see an explosion of creativity like we've never seen before. It happened with cinema, and it will happen with spatial animation. If you want to hear more about the project I'm working on, consider subscribing to this channel. I promise the next episode will be all about the concept art for New Venice. I know I said that in the last one, but I needed to get my thoughts out about VR. So until next time, thanks for watching.